In this episode of Locked On Capitals, we are going to do a player profile on Connor Brown. Connor Brown was another one of the big players that Brian McClellan and the Caps picked up on free agency. Where does he fit into this lineup? Let's talk about that next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check that out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And then if you like the videos, hit the thumbs up button on the video. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition, like I talked about in the lead there, this episode we are going to talk about Connor Brown. Connor Brown was a big acquisition that Brian McClellan went out to help solidify that top line right wing position, presumably. I guess it ultimately remains to be seen where he slots in. I think a lot will be determined in the training camps, of course, but I mean, that is ultimately why they picked him up. On paper, that is where he fits into this Caps lineup, and just a really solid pickup for the Washington Capitals. Because as we know that Tom Wilson is going to be missing some time. So they needed to find someone that is going to fill that role. And I think that ultimately, wherever he fits in after that, after Tom Wilson returns, will depend on injury and the performance of players, other than Tom Wilson. Brown, who has played 7 NHL seasons for the Leafs and Senators, scored 10 goals with 29 assists in 64 games played last season. He posted a career best 21 goals, which he did in the 2021 season in Ottawa. And if you just take a look at his statistics, they are quite good, I've got to say. He is a guy that, like I say, it was one of the ones that I was a bit surprised that the Capitals were able to get him, to be honest with you. But they went out and they did the right thing by picking him up. In an interview today, there was a presser today with Dylan Strome and Connor Brown. As it turns out, the two of the Capitals' newest forwards will not need an introduction when training camp opens in September, writes The Athletic. They were teammates on the OHL's Erie Otters in the 2013-2014 season. He says, "I remember my first game in junior. I didn't really know what to expect," said Strome of a loaded Erie team that also featured Connor McDavid and Andre Burakovsky. "I was really young and just finding my way. We lost the first game of the season. Brown came off the ice and was upset and frustrated that we lost. He is a great leader. He was a captain of our team then, and he's a great hockey player." So a guy that has some really great leadership qualities, and that is quite the company that he's keeping. If you listen to Connor McDavid and Andre Burakovsky, two really great players in the NHL, as we remember, Andre Burakovsky played for the Caps, but never really seemed to gel with this Capitals lineup. Next season, the Toronto area natives will be sharing the same locker room again in DC. Strome signed a 1-year, $3.5 million contract in free agency, and Brown was acquired via trade for a 2024 second-round pick. And, I'm not crazy about giving up draft picks, but this Washington Capitals team is in a win-now mode. Like I've talked about, Alex Ovechkin, Nick Backstrom, TJ Oshie, they are not getting any younger. We need to make the most of this window that's open, but is ultimately closing here. This time around, however, the stakes will be significantly higher after he didn't receive a qualifying offer in Chicago. Strome, the 2015 number 3 pick overall, is looking to prove he's deserving of a long-term commitment, whether that's in Washington or elsewhere. Brown, however, will be under pressure too. He's entering the last season of a 3-year deal that averages $3.6 million. And on paper, I love this deal. And I've talked about this all week. I've been banging the drum for Brian McClellan on the great job he did, but he looked at the situations that were out there. In this last episode, I talked about Dylan Strome. In this one, we're going to talk about Connor Brown. I'm talking a little bit about both of them here, just because they had press availability today with the Caps press corps. But as it turns out, they both know each other, which is always a bonus, and it seems like they like each other. So there should be some good chemistry between them anyway. So that's always a good thing. If you can get players that get along together, all the better. And just really two big pickups. The Caps, they're counting on their new forwards to help them overcome the absence of Nick Backstrom and Tom Wilson, and to propel the aging Alex Ovechkin-led nucleus deep into the postseason after 4 consecutive round exits. And that's what I've talked about all this postseason is a first round exit. What is this Washington Capitals team going to do to avoid another first round exit? And as it turns out, Brian McClellan had some tricks up his sleeve by picking up, let's count them, Darcy Kemper, by picking up Dylan Strome, Connor Brown, just some really top tier players. There's other ones, Charlie Lindgren in there. There's Borgstrom, but those are the marquee names out there that Mac signed on free agency. Just everything about the team, Strome said. Ask why he picked the Caps over other suitors. The way they play, their style of game, it fits my game really good. And obviously, there are some great wingers to play with as well. And I think, he might be talking about Mr. Alex Ovechkin, perhaps. There's a lot of difference, Tom Wilson when he's back. There are a lot of great players, and, it's an attractive team to play for. Like I said, the Washington Capitals have only won one Stanley Cup, but they make it to the playoffs on a regular basis. And that's got to be attractive to a lot of the different players out there, especially when you take a look at that Blackhawks team or the Ottawa Senators. Both teams, I don't know how the Blackhawks are going to be next year. I do think that the Ottawa Senators team is on the rise. They picked up some big players. They picked up DeBrincat. They picked up Cam Talbot, a bunch of other players, plus they're stacked with draft picks. Strome said he was surprised when he wasn't qualified by the Blackhawks, for whom he'd played the previous season. The 25-year-old center will be a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. Again, when his current deal with the Caps expires next summer, provided, of course, he doesn't earn an extension sooner. And you got to think that if these guys play well, this is an aging roster. It was a first-round exit. Let's kind of assess the quality that's on the ice, and then we can have some leeway to play with here. I felt I played my way into getting a qualifying offer, but the way that the Blackhawks are trending and the way they're looking to do things coming into next year, I'm not going to say I was surprised at the decision, he said. Gives me a real drive for the summer to be my best going into the season and show what I can do to the Caps. Made a good choice in signing me. Strome can play center, wing, but with Backstrom's hip injury sidelined indefinitely, it makes the most sense for him to slot in the second line behind Evgeny Kuznetsov. Strome spent most of the last season centering Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Kane. Again, some really top of the line company there. And per Sports Logic's analytics, had a strong season on a team that finished 27th. In Washington, Strome would fit in nicely between Mantha and TJ Oshie. And, I got to agree with that assessment. And let's take a look at Brown. That's what this episode is about primarily, is Brown. But like I said, there was a media availability with most of these players. So I'm trying to cover both of those players. Taking a look at Connor Brown. Brown, 28, could open the season as the right wing on the top line alongside Ovechkin and Kuznetsov in the spot vacated by Wilson, who is working his way back from an ACL injury on his left knee and is not expected back until December. Brown knows Wilson well, growing up playing against him in youth and junior hockey. So it seems like Tom Wilson is really plugged in with a lot of different players, and it helps that there's already some chemistry on this team that we know I think will actually help them gel better on the ice going forward. All right, so after the break here, we are going to continue to talk about kind of a player profile of Connor Brown. Where does he fit into this lineup? I think we know where he's going to fit into this lineup, but ultimately, where will that be? We'll talk about that. But first, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs, find all your favorite sports and events, At the number one online source for odds, lines, and games, find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting, in-game betting, betting scores, and podcasts. They have you covered, and just a really great website to go to. So if you want to find out stats, if you want to find out where to make bets, it makes the games that you're watching that much more interesting when you have money on it. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, welcome back to this edition of Locked On Capitals. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And in this episode, we are concentrating primarily on Connor Brown. We talked about in the first segment there a little bit about Dylan Strome as well, just because they both had media availability to the Caps press corps. Talking about Brown here. We've always kind of been rivals in a friendly way, Brown said. Last season, Brown established a career high in assists and was just 4 points off his best total despite appearing in only 64 games. Brown is also a penalty kill specialist. In fact, since 2019, no NHL forward has skated more minutes shorthanded than he has. So those are quite staggering statistics if you look at it. Brown's last 3 seasons, in the 21-22 season, in 64 games, 10 goals, 29 assists, 39 points. In the 2021 season, in 56 games, 21 goals, 14 assists, and 35 points. And then in the 19-20 season, 71 games, 16 goals, 27 assists, 43 points. I like it. Penalty, PIM, penalty minutes as well. 24 in the 20 season, 12 in the 21 season, and 10 in the 22 season. So just real sparkling stats on Connor Brown. And, kind of what I've heard by the talking heads is that the Senators fans were not too crazy that the Senators parted with him. But, their loss is our gain is the way I look at it. If the first line is where he indeed starts out, Brown joked that it will be easy skating alongside 2 of the game's top offensive players. I mean, what a role for him to kind of slide into, playing with Kuznetsov and Alex Ovechkin. I don't think it gets much better than that if you're a hockey player. They've been 2 of the biggest talents in the league for a long time, Brown said of Ovechkin and Kuznetsov. I've been on the other side of it, and it would be amazing to play with those guys. Lucky enough, he added, this team's got lots of good players up and down the lineup, so I don't think there's really a bad spot where you can fall. And if you look at it, even the Caps' fourth line this last year, Hathaway, Hagelin out there. It was a stack line out there, and they both played well. I know that Hagelin isn't going to be playing out there, but we have Axel Jonsson-Fjällby who will slot in there. So Hathaway, Dowd, and Hagelin was a really great line for them. So just to kind of exemplify what he's talking about there, that this team has scoring depth throughout, kind of the first line through the fourth line. And, it's going to be a fun season for these Capitals players and for the fans, to be honest with you. I'm most excited for next season to start. Training camp is still 2 months away, and much will be decided during it. But if Strome and Brown end up where they are, being penciled in at the moment, the opening night forward lineup could look something like this. And then in this article in the Athletic, they talk about, as we mentioned earlier, Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, Brown on the top line, Mantha, Strome, TJ Oshie in the second, McMichael, Eller, and Sheary third line, Marcus Johansson or Joe Snively. I mean, I think that we can't forget about Joe Snively or Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, Nick Dowd, and Garnet Hathaway on the right wing. And some depth in there, too. I like the Joe Snively, Axel Jonsson-Fjällby thing. I think they both played well. Joe Snively is the one that suffered that injury. And it's really, kind of one of those things that you can look back on and go, what could have been for Joe Snively? When he was called up last season, he was called up just based on injury. And it was a name that I heard of, but I didn't have too lofty of expectations for him. But he exceeded all of my expectations and played well until he suffered that injury. Although the above lineup doesn't appear to have much room for the organization's young players, it should create an environment that fosters competition. And, what we've talked about is this rebuild and this retool. But, I think that what it boils down to is they want to make the most of the years with Ovechkin and Backstrom if he comes back, and TJ Oshie, and kind of just slowly filter in your McMichaels, your Sniveleys, your Fialbis into there. Because, I know that some teams are put in a position where they just rip it down and start all over again. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. An example of it going well is the New York Rangers. An example of it going poorly would be the Red Wings, the Blackhawks. If you want to look a little closer to home in a different sport, the Washington Nationals. Ouch. Just as a sidebar here, the Washington Nationals have really got to find a way to re-sign Juan Soto. I know that this is a hockey podcast, but I am a Nationals fan. Figure it out, Nationals. All right, I'm going to get back to hockey here. It will also give Peter Laviolette options. The top three right wingers can be moved up and down the lineup. That side will also get a lot more interesting when Tom Wilson returns. Connor McMichael, who making strides at center late last season, could pressure on Lars Eller, who was used sparingly on the wing if Axel Janssen-Fjällby doesn't win the fourth line left wing spot outright. He'll also be peering over the shoulder of whoever does. It's also not hard to envision Joe Snively pushing for playing time either. And, Lars Eller was one of the players that I had kind of pegged, and a lot of different other guys had pegged as playing maybe his last game with the Capitals. But then if you take a look at the injuries to Tom Wilson, you take a look at to the injury of Nick Backstrom, I think that kind of gave him more of a role on this team and some more purpose, because for a while there, it was like, well, where is he going to fit in on this team? But as it turns out, it was kind of based on necessity. As for the new guys, Brown said he's excited to be reunited with Strome, a highly skilled player, great hands, can score, he said. He's still coming into his own in his league. He is such a smart player, and usually the smart players get better and better as they get older and start to figure out how they can be successful. He's also pumped to see what the Caps can do next year. We look good, Brown said. There's always been good. They've always been good, and I really like that additions that we've made. They are always the kind of couple good additions away from being one of the best teams in the league, if not the best. They proved that not so long ago, and a lot of core pieces are still in place. I'm really, really excited about the additions that they've made. I'm excited to be part of it, and I'm excited what I can bring and what I can help do to help this team take them over the edge. And I'm excited too. I'm excited to see, what does Darcy Kemper add to this team? What does Charlie Lindgren add to this team? What does Dylan Strome and Connor Brown and Borgstrom and, all these players that they picked up? What are they going to add to this team? It is going to be an exciting season for the Capitals, for the players, for the fans, because there has been a lot of new blood injected into this team. How will that translate out onto the ice? I guess remains to be seen, but on paper, it looks really well. And, I am hoping for bigger and better things from this Capitals team, because let's be honest here. I don't want to see, and I don't want to jinx myself here. I don't want another first round exit next year. I don't think that's going to be the case based on these additions. My fingers are crossed that these new players can help get them over the top. All right, so after the break, we are going to continue to talk about Connor Brown and what will he bring to this Capitals team. But first, which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. All right, welcome back to this edition of Locked On Capitals. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find this show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And in tonight's show, this morning's show, whenever you plan on listening to this, I usually record at night, so just in all transparency, is that this Capitals team went out and they made some big changes. They picked up Connor Brown. They picked up Dylan Strome. In this episode, we are concentrating primarily on Connor Brown. We've talked a little bit about other players and where they slayed in on this team. But just what's the origin story of Connor Brown? Where does he fit in? So the scouting report, let's rewind the tape and go all the way back to the beginning. The scouting report on him is he can be used in a wide variety of roles at the NHL level and is a very much a plug-and-play player, has proven capable of putting up very good numbers at lower levels. Thanks largely to good offensive instincts, he's plenty resilient and somewhat tenacious in his approach, does not have an ideal size. As a result, he could stand to add more bulk and become stronger, can be used in any game situation, and is an asset when playing with elite offensive talent. So that was the book on him. That was the scouting report. In the very beginning, got to say it's pretty good. They talked about that he needs to bulk up, but there's a lot of players that you could put in that category. If you look at Tom Wilson from 10 years ago, he's not the man that he is today. He was kind of, more of a thin, a smaller man, shall we say. Long range potential on him, complementary two-way winger, and I don't think you can really ask for anything more for a good review on him. If let's take a look at his goals, let's talk about his origin story. If you take a look at it, he does go out there and he does score quite a bit of goals. In the 21-22 season, in 64 games played, 10 goals, so not too bad, and 29 assists. He's played in the Toronto Marlboros, St. Michael's Buzzers, Erie Otters, the Toronto Marlies, the Maple Leafs, the Senators. So he has a great kind of history and pedigree. If you look at those teams that he's played on in his early years, generally those are great players that come out of those organizations. So I think that, in large part, that is what kind of has formed him into the player that he is today. And, I expect big things from him. And, let's kind of look back even a bit further. This is Connor Brown year in review from a couple years ago. They were talking about it in the second year with the Ottawa Senators. Brown reached new levels of offensive productivity and even set some records along the way. Brown posted a career high 21 goals in just 56 games, a 31 goal pace over a full 82 game season. His 35 points prorates to 51 over 82, which would have also been a career high. As you may have heard, Brown set the Sens record for most consecutive games with at least one goal when he tallied in 8 consecutive games. He also led the NHL with an impressive 5 shorthanded tallies. So from a goal scoring perspective, the 21 campaign was a breakout season for Brown. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the winger scored on a 17.1 of his shots compared to a career rate of 12.3. Whether that was a sign of a player getting a bit lucky or a guy figuring out how to maximize his talents in a role is at least part of the eye of the beholder. The Sens' achievement descent, if less spectacular overall results when he was on the ice, Brown posted a 50.46 and a 46.53. Here's why Micah McCurdy's model at Hockey Viz assesses his, and then they kind of just have what they call a spray chart of where, he likes to score the puck and that kind of thing. At 5-on-5, Brown was a slight negative on offense and a bit more of a positive on defense, while the contrast between Brown's impressive personal numbers and the team's overall offense output when he's on the ice has been the source of some debate in Sens fandom this year. His positive defensive impact is one of an area upon virtually everyone agrees on. And, just kind of a glowing story on Connor Brown. He played well with the Senators, and, just historically, he's just a solid player, and I expect big things from him. So the story of the season in that year, in the 21 season, much has already been written about Brown breaking out since his arrival in Ottawa, including this piece earlier last month from our very site. It bears repeating that when the Sens acquired him 2 summers ago, virtually no one expected him to score at this rate. It's also worth remembering that much of it in this past season, Brown was struggling quite badly. He didn't net a goal in any of the team's first 10 games, and he was sitting on 6 goals and 9 assists for 15 points at a 35-game mark. So, he kind of appears to be a guy that comes off at a slow start. So that's fine. You see that in all professional sports. Sometimes you see baseball players that have a slow start. Sometimes it's hockey players, football players, etc. That's okay, as long as they find their groove somewhere throughout the season. Ultimately, it would be great if he could find his groove right away. But if it takes some time, that's okay. I don't think we can ultimately change that anyway. That's what kind of player he is. But I am excited about this Capitals team. They went out and they addressed all the areas that I think needed addressing. We talked about, and you hear people on the NHL network talking about how this team needs to get younger, and it's going to happen in time. It's slowly trickling in. You see your McMichaels, your Sniveleys, your Fialbys. They're slowly making their way in there. On the defense, Faravari. Um, I don't think it always has to be this polarizing thing where, it's like we're fire sale, we're getting rid of everyone, and then we're going to add a bunch of young players. I don't think that's going to have a real good result. I think that if you can have mentors out there like an Alex Ovechkin, if I was a hockey player, a young hockey player, I would love nothing more than to play on the Capitals. The amount of players on the team that you can learn from, Ovechkin and Oshie and Backstrom when he's healthy, and Tom Wilson when he's healthy, and the defense, John Carlson, Dmitry Orlov. There's just so many great players as a young player you can learn from on this Caps team that, I think it would be a waste of talent and kind of what they put together over all these years. I know I've talked about that they need to get younger, and it will happen over time. But I think, hindsight 2020, they're going about it the right way. They're doing it at a slow pace. It's not this thing where they're just getting rid of everyone and starting over everyone, freshly. I don't think that that is the right way to do things. I think that ultimately that doesn't have a real good result. And I think the Capitals are poised to do really well in the Metro. I know that a lot of the other teams in the Metro got a lot better too. So I think that the Capitals will have their work cut out for them. But I think they're up for the challenge. There's some great additions. You have Darcy Kemper in net. Come on. He won the Stanley Cup this last season. If anyone out there that's listening to this show or watching on YouTube has an issue with that, really think about your assessment of that. Even if Darcy is not as advertised, even if he's just a fraction of that, that's still a heck of a lot better than Vanacek and Samsonov. I wish nothing but Vanacek and Samsonov the best. Sammy got a deal up in Toronto, 1-year deal, kind of another one of those prove me deals up there. And Vanacek went through arbitration. I think was it a 3-year deal he got with the Devils. So everything's turning up roses for those guys anyway. They got new deals. It's not like, they don't have a deal in the NHL or they got sent down the AHL. But this is the Capitals' time to shine. We're stocked. We're rocked. We're ready to go. We got Kemper. We got Lindgren in net. We got a top line that's great. Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, and Connor Brown. Come on. And then if Backstrom comes back and Wilson comes back, look out. I think the sky's the limit for this Capitals team. Once they get healthy, once everyone comes back, and you want to know something else? Even when they're not healthy, just with the players they picked up right now, they look good. They look really good. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a fan of the team and I host this show. I honestly think that this team is poised to be in a really good spot to start this next season. And Caps Nation, be positive about this season because I think the arrow's pointing up, and I think that you can expect a much better outcome from the outcome we had last season. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On Experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. So like I was talking about earlier in the week, this podcast will switch to 3 shows a week, starting next week through July, and then I believe all of August. But then we'll start ramping up as the season approaches. But just keep it locked here to Locked On Capitals. Subscribe on your favorite podcatcher. Subscribe on YouTube. That way you will know when the new episodes are available. And I'm going to keep you guys in the know. So if there's something news breaking, if I wasn't planning on doing a podcast that day, I'm going to record one that day because that's my job to keep you guys in the know. All right. Once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And I'll talk to you again tomorrow.